Hello, this is Sarah Bordy and the Debunking Myths assignment for Concordia University. For this assignment, I chose to examine further the fallacy of obviousness. And so, through the readings, many case studies were presented through which elements of consideration were given leniency in terms of the controls of each experiment. And through that, each experiment or each leniency that was given made me further examine my own actions on how, a neurological level, I am far less aware consciously of each moment and action and decision that's made daily than I thought I was prior to this particular assignment. And so, in light of this, Daniel Kahneman highlights an element of his book called Thinking Fast and Slow, stating something fundamental about the human mind, namely, is that humans are blind to the obvious, and that we are also blind to our blindness. And so, quite frankly, this statement made the deeper thinker in me get a little bit of a ruffled feather syndrome. I thought, how could we possibly be unaware of something that's presented as a larger whole in terms of the context in which we strive to understand? But after I stepped back and delved deeper, I began to understand why this particular concept is perpetuated, in fact, on a much larger scale for a deeper meaning. So, to support this, Teppo Fellin interprets the fallacy of obviousness with a very different approach. He says that humans, in fact, are not necessarily blind to the obvious, but that obviousness is simply dependent on what we find relevant for a particular question or task. And so, through this element of study, each school of thought is certainly supported by, namely, task-driven relevancies to solve or overcome initial questions or problems. And so for me, hence, this schism formulated two questions in my mind. So first, are people truly obvious and oblivious to what is right in front of them, or is there more of a deep and subconscious level of understanding and processing occurring on the neurological level? And secondly, how can this be applied to the classroom in terms of student comprehension, synthesis, and retention of what we intend to be taught? And so this brought to mind some examples of my own life in terms of obliviousness, looking everywhere, for example, for glasses that are already on top of our head, or searching for our car keys to simply discover they're already in our hands. And so what this brought to mind for me was, how often do similar instances or occurrences happen neurologically with our students, and more importantly, how do we manage this element of educational psychology within our own parameters of instruction and the classroom setting that we all strive to accommodate? And so obviously a basic premise surrounding the neurology of learning is that the brain needs to be subject to various conditions to not only optimize neuroplasty, the ability to change and adapt, but also neurogenesis, the ability to formulate new neuron synapses and ergo memory and learning tactics and retention, so on and so forth. And so, to further support this, Daniela Koffer, who happens to be a professor of integrative biology at Berkeley, said that moderate stress is beneficial for learning, while mild and extreme stress are both detrimental to learning and overall health of well-being. And so many of us would say, well, yes, as teachers we know this is obvious. If you've ever sat through an AP final exam week, it's clearly indicated. However, if we peel back the layers to her statement, we can better discern some of the elements in terms of not only the meaning to, but also how to effectively navigate the fallacy of obliviousness and obviousness. So, hence, we want to engage our students to delve deeper into the questions and pulling on, many different philosophers and psychological analyses to stimulate a higher level of thinking skills. But we want to accommodate this and accomplish this without pigeonholing them into a focus that's so incredibly restrictive that they miss the, proverbial gorilla in the room. And so what I started to ponder and wonder is simply this: what does moderate stress mean? What does it look like? And I think most importantly, how does it become optimally utilized within a classroom setting? And so as a teacher who strives to create a welcoming and challenging and loving classroom environment, implementing stress intentionally beyond what I already unintentionally do for my students has never once crossed my mind. And so, as an educational psychology interest has always been present. I'm aware that low stress typically translates into low performance, and certainly, whereas high stress stimulates one's fight or flight reaction. And so clearly, neither is the ideal in terms of a classroom setting, nor adds to the debunking of the myth that we've been assigned. However, while I have had students try to flee at the first verse of Beowulf or Canterbury Tales, I really put the laughter aside and began to consider how to overcome potential fallacies of obviousness through this application of moderate stress. And so what I began to do was jot down what I deemed, from my students' perspective, stress-inducing elements of an English classroom. And so some of the elements that were recorded were reading comprehension assignments, grammar on essays, not raising one's hand and yet being called upon, having writer's block in terms of timed assignments, and so on and so forth. And so on the heels of identifying student stressors, I was reminded of Rick Riordan's words, which says, "Fairness does not mean everyone gets the same. Instead, fairness means everybody gets what they need." And so I thought, okay, I love it. It's something I've always, sort of attuned to, but how does one truly optimize, not only educationally, but neurologically and psychologically, neuron synapse connection for memory while stimulating also the rhythm of neurons through the learning process for attention maintenance in a group of exceptionally diverse students, not only effectively, but also efficiently? And so I thought, well, we'll go back to the start. So let us consider for a moment Simon and Chabris's classic experiment in which a subject is asked to count the number of passes on a basketball screen, amidst of which a gorilla crosses the screen. And many people's reactions are based in skepticism, as was mine initially. How could you possibly miss a gorilla meandering across the screen? However, re-examining this particular study with fresh eyes provided a connection for me between all the questions that seemed to arise and truly the induction and the application of neuroeducation within my own classroom and my own pedagogy. And so I began to realize that the fallacy of obviousness not only exists in several ways within my classroom and school, but I've also clearly observed it regularly without really identifying any of the actions or resulting as thus. And so, for example, this can be clearly discerned through study habits, faculty presumption of not only student ability, but inevitable student outcome, and particularly within the world of global media and online interaction, the impact of media. And so students, from what I've observed, often feel that they don't have to study, or they have a preconceived solid grasp upon the assessed material. If they deem it common sense or otherwise relatable, or if they feel like they can figure it out without much thought or time being put into it. And interestingly enough, many of these same students often miss questions on the ensuing exams because they either do not provide enough support, or they simply do not read the question. And case in point, the fallacy of obviousness is at work. If they do not see the value in it, they do not become aware of the time parameters that are necessarily required in order to optimize their learning. And similarly, faculty presumptions and media impact act upon one's belief or one's notions that how associative are one's beliefs to the actuated results. And so it almost comes to mind, the phrase, hindsight is always 20/20. In light of those examples, everybody can be a Monday morning quarterback, so to speak, but how do you adequately prepare students proactively to perpetuate their own learning in a way that prevents any of the ensuing results that we have recently discussed? And so Stephen Johnson states in his book, where good ideas come from, the idea of the adjacent possible is that at any moment the world is capable of extraordinary change. And that strange and beautiful truth about the adjacent possibilities is that the boundaries grow as you explore them. And so, taking the amalgamation of not only neural application to the world of education, but also pairing it with debunking the myth of the fallacy of obviousness, I now not only welcome the exploration of boundaries in both fields of studies, but also through my reading and pondering, I plan to utilize moderate stress through kinetic movement, varied discussion methodologies, change things from time to time to make sure that students are not only actively engaged, but also engaged on a higher level, and accommodating a shifting of seating arrangements per assignment parameters. And so I truly embrace the results of Hook and Farah's research on the brain-based applications through curiosity and bridging the gaps in practical applications. And moving forward, I hope to overcome and effectively debunk the fallacy of obviousness present in my school environment by action selection and behavior sustainment to better serve my students, myself, and the faculty. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate you listening.